people. First, I want to open up this presentation by just reading the beginning of a resolution from the Congress, the Fifth Congress of the African People's Socialist Party that commenced in July of 2010. It says, the resolution of the Fifth Congress of the African People's Socialist Party is to combat the specific oppression of African women. This resolution is guided by our belief that we want an end to the political and social oppression and economic exploitation of African women. We believe in the absolute, unequivocal political, social, economic equality of African women and men. We believe that a fundamental test of the progressive or revolutionary character of any organization, party, movement, or society is its commitment, confirmed in practice, to the destruction of the special oppression of women and the elevation of women to the rightful place as equal partners and leaders in the forward motion of the development of human society and as leaders, makers, and shapers of human history. Uhuru. Uhuru. Okay. The struggle to end oppression and exploitation of African women must be a collective one. Many times African women find ourselves raising issues only to look around and find out that we're alone making that struggle. African women have stood side by side in a struggle for liberation and in many cases have led the revolution. We have been Harriets, the Sojourners, the Queen Mother Moores, the Asadas, the Fannie Lou Hammers, the Queen Nzingas, the Nanny of the Maroons, the Gaitas, the Ayeshas, Uhuru, and we have been exposing the contradictions and willing to lay down our lives for the people. When there's an outcry for the masses to take on the struggle, African women have always answered the call. And yet many times we are removed from the conversation and just added as a footnote. When there are mass rapes happening in the Congo, the activism around eradicating such an issue is upheld as a women's issue. When dying in childbirth in record numbers, it's always brought out as a women's issue, and therefore left for women to struggle for it. But in reality, rape, murder, and dying of millions of African women is the rape, murder, and death of African people, period. Uhuru. And when women are raised, it shouldn't be done in such a dismissive afterthought type of way. You know, something like there's a strong measure put out about African men, and this is what's going on with men, and we've struggled around that yesterday. And then some afterthought comment that includes, oh yeah, and women too, which really only generalizes the problem, and that may need to even go deeper and be specifically different for African women. Like if we're going to talk about women in prison, let's talk about women in prison. Don't just add it on to the men's experience because that's the case. We keep, we're talking about right now. I read somewhere like since 1986, the amount of black women that go to prison has risen 800%. Many of whom go to jail for crimes of self-defense, and many of whom are single mothers. And what happens is to the African family when the father's already removed, and now you're taking the woman away as well. What happens to the children? When we are in a struggle for African liberation, the voice and viewpoint of African women must be heard. It must be recognized in order for the revolution to be considered complete. We have, we have to start including African women in the conversation in a real way. And when we do that, you will start to see ourselves as integral cogs in the movement, not as some sidekick and that only gets mentioned as closing credits. And as sisters, we must take that struggle. We must make the struggle to be included. Not for ourselves to be individually recognized, but to make sure that those who aren't here to voice it can be heard and you can hear you. I appreciated the interventions that Sister Natasha made throughout the convention, and Sister Pastor Nzinga stood up here and talked about matriarchy, and sisters sitting in the audience yesterday raised the struggle of the omission of women and the kind of generalized term of men to represent all African people. If we recognize there is a specific oppression of African women rooted in forms of social, reproductive, and economic oppression, then it's a gross error not to also bring that discussion to the general conversation of African liberation. But it's not enough to tell men they need to include us. It's for us to take that active stance and bring our issues to the platform. This is difficult, I know, because many of us, myself included, have grown up in a culture that says we must be that strong black woman that supports her man. Women must be seen and not heard, and this is not something that's already intrinsic in our society. We have to understand that this is something that's been taught to us through religion and other aspects that come in to our culture. And so it's that fear. In essence, being a strong black woman meant getting a point across through the male mouthpiece. This is mainly because we think that to be strong on our own and to raise struggle would mean challenging the man that we have been groomed to support no matter what. We may fear that we're going to be labeled as feminists or something like that. But the fact remains that when we speak about the real injustice and concerns of African people, and women in specific, we need to know how to speak about it. We need to have a political understanding of why something is happening and offer a critical analysis that challenges those labels that probably come out of the mouths of people that fear that kind of growth in African women anyway. When African women gain a historical and political understanding of African people, and even how we have been used and exploited within the system of capitalism, imperialism, white power, we begin to work out the correct way to struggle amongst ourselves, African men to African women, which is a non-antagonistic role, and which is very different from how we have to struggle with white power. If we have a political analysis of what's going on in the Congo, the rapes and dying mothers of babies in Sierra Leone, the kidnapping of African children all over the world, gentrification, the welfare system, etc., we reveal that these situations are all orchestrated by imperialism. This is not to excuse the actual hand that carries it out. It may be black. We know that the raping of women and children in the Congo is vile and disgusting and should be something that all African people struggle to correct. When we hear of the rape of children as young as 1 year old and 30 men participating in a gang rape of one woman, we have to get mad on an international level. But we must also understand that the grand scale in which this is happening would not be so if it wasn't for colonial oppression, neocolonialism, theft of the people's resources, such as coltan, and that's used in every laptop and mobile device, or the diamonds that they're coming out of the land, or the destruction of the rainforest in Congo. Women have survived their mates and are now on land that the imperialist capitalists want in order to continue to do most of the things that they've already been doing. This is why we see the mass rape and the men and all of that being used to remove the women off of that land. So we have to raise a struggle not just as some women's issue. This is an issue for African people to take on. So here we are, and I know it's hard to look past that oppression. I know it's hard to look past the women's issue and see that that connection to capitalism and imperialism. But we must know how to speak about it. This is how we must understand it and communicate it. And instead of pitting African women against African men, which is not the correct way. As African women, we have survived. We have survived watching our loved ones be murdered. We have survived the kidnappings of our babies. We have survived rape and molestation. We have survived over-sexualization. We have experienced it all, and yet we are still here fighting because we too have been on the front lines and have made this thing, and we have had this thing smack us over our heads. We have had it fondle us and make us its tool. We are mad. We are mad that we have been used as a means to further oppress our people. We are mad that our men are locked up in this injustice system that ties us to it through child support and other avenues that they really give African women as a platform to really be opportunistic and contribute to the system. So if you say if you say your man doesn't want to pay child support, you can act as a tool to send him to jail. Many of us are working with the oppressor and don't really understand it. But that's not to say that if we have African men who have non-involvement in our lives, that we as revolutionaries, we recognize the system of, I'm sorry, one second. I'm jumping around. Yeah, but it's not to say that if we have, that we're making an excuse for African men's non-involvement, but as a revolutionary, recognize that the injustice system is a modern-day slave-holding and trading system, and how can we then actively work with it to incarcerate our men? We have been used by the welfare system to continue to break up our families. Now, we don't need no white man coming in and saying, we're going to buy your man and take him away. All they have to ask you is, where's your child's father? We need to get money from him first. And if he don't have no job, and if he ain't got no means to support you, it's going to be a problem, and he most likely will go to jail. So the mother is faced with, do you give these people this information and risk losing some of those benefits that we hold so dear? And this could mean the difference between living on the streets or being able to provide an apartment or food subsidies for your children. So this is how African women have been used, and I'm mad about it because I don't want to be a part of that. And when I see other African women participating in that, I know that a problem with poverty and you want to get resources and things like that. But I think we have to be able to feed that political education to African women to let them know what's going on and how they're being used. So we have poverty, which is another aspect of the exploitation of African women, especially sexual exploitation. I was actually watching a program on TV where they were talking about women in Senegal whose main goal was to catch them a white husband. They sit on the internet all day communicating with Europe trying to get them a white husband. And all I could think about is when I was reading slave narratives of how African women would, as a means to alleviate some of the problems and maybe even assist in getting themselves and their family members out of slavery, would appeal to white men. And in marrying them or doing all these other types of things, they would hope that this white man will fulfill his promise and set you free. And this is the same type of dynamic that I saw when this woman was talking about they are communicating with white men on internet just to get out of their condition. You cannot have a relationship like this with your oppressor. He is a prey, and he is looking for you to be something to him, a sexual object. And I think that African women need to understand how that is in that relationship between the colonial oppressor and being colonized. Uhuru. Uhuru. So there's also this false sense of individualism that have African women aligning themselves with white feminist ideology, having themselves compared to men in general. White feminist belief is that to be respected, they have to become white men. They have to act like them, be like them, do the same jobs, and all of that to be recognized, when in reality, African women have always been respected. Actually, African communities, many African communities are based on a system of matriarchy, where African women were able to own lands. Some of the children were able to take the mother's name. They've always been the movers and shakers, the economic platform of a village. We have always been respected, but we have forgotten that, or it has been stripped from us. And so we believe now that following white feminist ideology of feminism, of I'm going to be just like him, have put us in a place where some of us have been sexually exploited. We have sisters who go and shake their butts on the